Сегодня, 25 октября, я нахожусь в центре Манхэттена, и я приехала для участия в форуме коренных народов постсоветского пространства. Естественно, мы сюда приехали не как представители коренных народов, а исключительно как представители чеченского государства и чеченского правительства. Мы никоим образом, мы, чеченцы, не идентифицируем себя как коренными народами террористического российского государства по той простой причине, что мы никогда не входили в состав Российской Федерации. И все те политические процессы, которые проходили на территории Чеченской Республики Ичкерии еще с 1990 года, есть тому доказательство. Это во-первых. Во-вторых, цель моего визита заключается в том, чтобы показать коренным народам, что мы их поддерживаем, что мы поддерживаем коалицию коренных народов. Почему? Потому что они являются жертвами Российской империи. Так же, как и чеченский народ, он является жертвой Российской империи. И основная, естественно, цель моего визита заключается в том, чтобы призвать наших американских партнеров, используя свое дипломатическое влияние, побудить Парламентскую ассамблею Совета Европы предоставить нам отдельную площадку, чтобы мы могли уже на этой платформе сами от себя говорить, и чтобы Чеченская Республика Ичкерия могла вести свободный диалог с другими европейскими странами. Это во-вторых. В-третьих, также надо было напомнить нашим американским партнерам, что да, мы сотрудничаем, но нам необходимо уже официальное признание оккупации нашего государства, как это сделала Украина 22 октября 2022 года, и что это официальное признание оккупации нашего государства нам действительно облегчит жизнь, облегчит путь, чтобы уже действительно реализовать физическую деоккупацию Чеченской Республики Ичкерия. Очень приятно было увидеть реакцию американцев, и я думаю, что в очень скором будущем мы увидим масштабные изменения. Также я напомнила нашим американским друзьям о том, что не только Чеченская Республика, но и весь Северный Кавказ может стать очень ценным партнером для Соединенных Штатов Америки и также для всех стран свободного цивилизованного мира. Я сказала, что нужно перестать смотреть на Кавказ через русские линзы. Почему? Потому что Кавказ является неотъемлемой частью Европы. И что Российская так называемая Федерация является оккупантом на территориях кавказских народов. И возвращение черкесских земель черкесам, ингушских земель ингушам, возвращение дагестанских земель дагестанцам, возвращение горы Эльбрус кабардинцам и балкарцам, это укрепит Северный Кавказ и позволит Северному Кавказу в будущем обеспечить безопасность всей Восточной Европы и стать уже полноценным участником международной системы.
Thank you very much, Julia. And before I start, I would like to thank the organizers of this event and thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. In fact, it's a great honor for me to be here. Before actually I start talking about the human rights violations, I'm going to mostly focus on the North Caucasus because I come originally from Chechnya and I was born in Chechnya. I would like just to clarify that the Chechen people, we the Chechens, we do not identify ourselves as the indigenous peoples of Russia simply because we have never been part of the Russian Federation. We adopted, the Chechen state adopted its Declaration of Sovereignty in 1990, and then we adopted our constitution in 1992, 1 year earlier than the Russian Federation. And unlike other republics, 16 republics, we never signed the federal treaty with the Russian Federation. Therefore, we are not part of the Russian Federation, so we do not identify ourselves as the indigenous peoples of Russia. This is one element. However, we show full support for the indigenous peoples, and I would like to make it very clear that speaking on the behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Chechnya Republic of Ichkeria, we firmly support the indigenous peoples that live across the post-Soviet space. And unfortunately, indigenous peoples that live on the occupied territories by the so-called Russian Federation are misrepresented here in the West. And many here in the West believe that Russia is made up of solely Russians and that Russia is a Russian country, although there are many, many non-Russian peoples living within the borders. The question of the rights of the peoples of North Caucasus, the question of the autonomy of the North Caucasian republics is very in critical situation. Why? Because Russia desperately needs to keep the Caucasus within its borders, so it can have access to the natural resources that are within in the North Caucasus, that it can keep its military bases in North Caucasus, and that it can survive as an empire. So losing the North Caucasus and losing the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria is like a defeat for the Russian Empire, complete defeat for Russian Empire. And therefore, the Russian state and the Russian politicians, including Russian so-called liberals, do not see the future of their state without the North Caucasus. That's why even the idea of the independent Chechen Republic of Ichkeria is criminalized in Russia. The idea of the independence of the North Caucasus is criminalized in Russia. Not only criminalized, it's punished. Many, many individuals who actually defend the independence of Chechnya Republic of Ichkeria, defend the independence of Northern Caucasian peoples and North Caucasian republics, face either torture, death, murder, or their families are kidnapped in Chechnya, and it became dangerous for Chechen activists to speak about the rights of the Chechen peoples, but also mostly to speak about the independence of the Chechnya Republic of Ichkeria. So Russian politicians and Russian liberals do not see the future of Russia without the Chechnya Republic of Ichkeria and without the North Caucasus. You see, I've talked to many Russians in discussions at the forums, and I've seen the comments of the Russians under the posts. They always say Caucasus is ours, Kafkaz nash, or they say Grozny is a Russian city. But I've never ever heard them say Kafkaz nash. I never heard them to say the Caucasians are ours, or the Chechens are ours, or the Dagestanis. Yes, but when they talk about the territory is theirs. But the people who live on these territories are not theirs. Exactly, that's exactly. And I personally, I will be very honest on this. I am, maybe it's going to sound a little bit too much, but I'm very fed up of this narrative of Russian liberals and of Russian politicians. And they think that we, the peoples, let's say of North Caucasus, and the indigenous peoples that live across the post-Soviet era, are not capable of speaking for ourselves. And when we speak for ourselves, what they do, they try to discredit us, to discriminate us, to dehumanize us, and to take our narrative and completely manipulate it and switch it to something else. And how we should resist it by speaking up for ourselves. And this is very important. And you know, in Chechnya, we did not know much about the Buryat community, because unfortunately during the Soviet era and during the so-called New Russian Federation, the connections between our peoples, there were not any connections between our peoples. We did not have the representation offices of Buryats in Chechnya. We did not have the Chechen representation offices in Buryatia, for instance. There was no connection. And now it's time to really build these connections and to help each other and to show to the world that we can speak for ourselves and we are capable of taking decisions for our peoples, and that we want our lands back because they belong to us. Here in the West, many think, as I said before, that Russia is only about Russians, but there are a lot of non-Russian peoples, and there is a disregard for the indigenous peoples and their rights. And it's very important to raise awareness here in the West about the fact that there are nations that are struggling for their independence and for their freedom. And one of the speakers, Nadezhda, and I salute her for speaking the truth, regardless of the fact that she is in Buryatia, and for her courage to speak for the Buryat people. And I think this is amazing that we have people like Nadezhda who are not afraid to defend their own people. And she actually said very interesting and I think very truthful, she made a very truthful and very interesting statement saying that now the Buryats will realize that the independence of Buryatia is a solution to come out from war. Because as we can see from her statements that the Buryat people are really forced to fight in a war that is not theirs. People can receive, you know, an obligation to participate in the war, and they can't even go out, and they can't leave even Buryatia. So this is very tragic for the Buryat people. I think she's right, and I support this idea that the future of our peoples lies through the path of independence, and we should make understand the Western community and the international community that we want this independence and that we want to take decisions for our people by ourselves. And I hope that the Republic of Buryatia and the Republic of Chechnya very soon will get its own platform in the Parliamentary Assembly of Europe. And I think that Buryat nation deserves to speak for themselves and deserve to have a place to speak for themselves. And that should be done by Buryats only, in my belief. And
as a political nation.
As a political nation. Also, the same applies to the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия. I think the European community must realize that the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия needs its own platform, recognize the occupation of the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия as Ukraine did in 2022, recognize the occupation of the North Caucasus, and I hope that with the awareness that is increasing in the West, that the US government can use its influence to convince the European Union to grant this platform to the Buryat nation, grant this platform to the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия. On this positive note, and in the hope of a positive future, where the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия can open its own embassy in the Buryat Republic, and where the Buryat Republic can open its embassy in Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия. I'm going to end, and thank you very much for giving this time to me and having me here, and thank you for your patience and for your will to listen to us. You see, the human rights violations, it's a common practice in Chechnya, and it's a common practice that is used by the pro-Russian regime that is identified as Kadyrov's regime, but it's basically a Russian regime because the Kadyrov as an element was created by Putin. And we did not know who Kadyrov was until the moment Putin created him and appointed him as the head of the occupied territory and as the head of the occupation administration in Chechnya. So the cases of human rights violations are numerous in Chechnya. The list is very long, but I'm gonna name those that are very famous and that are very particularly cruel. Recently, I think it was three months ago, a teenager, Khomashov, he was killed by the local forces, and his body was thrown onto the streets for public display. And this was very, very cruel, and this measure was conducted by the pro-Russian regime, Kadyrov's regime. Then a blogger, 19-year-old blogger, Zakayev, he was kidnapped, brutally tortured, and then also killed. And recently, on the beginning of September, on the 5th of September, a 37-year-old teacher, Shoda Shamayeva, was kidnapped and killed. And the list goes on. And these human rights violations, they are not only limited in Chechnya, they happen across the North Caucasus. Last week, a famous blogger, a Dagestani blogger, Ultra Dagestani, Al-Bakar, he was actually killed by FSB agents in Turkey. And his only crime, the crime of Al-Bakar, was speaking for the independence of Dagestan. And this shows that Russia, as a country, if we can call it a country, does not respect democratic values and has absolutely no rule of law, the concept of rule of law. And this concept of rule of law does not work in Russia. Why? Because it's a corrupt governmental formation that is made up on occupied territories by suppressing the indigenous peoples on the occupied territories. And the solution to this problem is, I believe, there is a solution to this problem, and the solution to this problem is the dismantlement of the Russian corrupt state system and the dismantlement of the Russian Empire. Because although the centuries changed, the nature of the Russian Empire did not change. The name changed, the nature did not change. That's why all the indigenous peoples within Russian borders are treated as second-class citizens, are used as a cannon fodder in the imperial wars of Russia. Their indigenous rights are not respected, and their right to self-determination is not respected, and that's a big problem in my opinion. I hope this answers it.
So to briefly summarize, the situation in the region of Northern Caucasus is not exactly dangerous for the rights, it's exactly dangerous for the people, for their lives, right?
Well, you see, I think that everything is related, because people, of course, the will, for instance, the will of the Chechen people to be free and to live in an independent country, of course, it was not respected. Not only it was not respected, our people was massacred, for the fact that we expressed our desire to live in an independent country. The Russian so-called Federation started two body wars. 30% of our population was massacred. 42,000 children was killed. Many people were kidnapped, including my father in 2000, when it was the full war going on in Chechnya. So not only the people's political will is not respected, but also the rights. Because when you have a country, or you have a state, or you have a republic like Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия, where it is transformed into a completely isolated, closed space, of course the rights are not respected. And today, the Chechnya Republic of Ичкерия is not open to any human rights organizations. None of the international human rights organizations have access to the Chechen Republic territory, to the Chechen territory. So none of these organizations is working on the Chechen soil. And why? Because Putin just closed this zone, so the crimes that are committed on the Chechen territory on a daily basis are not documented.